Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're just going to give everybody a couple of minutes to get logged in. If you get a chance over in the chat, let me know where you're from, where you're tuning in from tonight. I am in coastal North Carolina, NorCal, short for Northern California. Hope you're having some good swell up there. We are not having any swell on the East Coast. Baltimore, Madison, Wisconsin. Wendy from Cincy. Cleveland, we got the 2 C's in the house. We just need one more, and then we got all the C's. Ravenna, south of Tucson, San Diego, and San Fran. Wow, California is representing tonight. That's pretty impressive. But then, of course, we got Rochester. Chicago, Philly, Mass, Canada. Is that place to the north of us? Kind of cold? I think I've heard of it before. Southern Indy. Brookline, Mass. Wow. So my wife went, she did her fellowship year research up at Braintree. So we know all about Somerville, although back in the day we called it Slummerville, but that's an old college joke. You probably know it if you're from up there. America's hat. I don't know what that means. Let me know what that means. Naperville. That is actually where, or very close to where the AVMA's offices are. New Mexico, more San Diego. Wow, this is a great group here tonight. Man, New York, Portland. Wow, Palm Springs, nice. Tennessee, thank you. Need some Southern representation out here. So far, it's like me and you, Tennessee. Go Dogs, by the way. Just going to throw that out there. I'm a proud University of Georgia graduate. We'll give it just another minute here. Canada equals America's hat. It's an old joke. I got it now. I got it. And I got to tell you, I'm an old guy, and I didn't know that old joke. So thank you very much. That is awesome. Well, guys, listen, we're going to be, Topsail Beach. Hey, there we go. Patty from Topsail. You're just down, I'm just down the road from you in Ocean Isle Beach, where there again is no surf. You guys actually had some decent surf the past weekend. We did not get it down here. Mexico. Welcome, welcome. New York City, Denver. Well, listen, as we kind of let everybody roll in, I'll be checking the messages as much as I can. We do have some people from Basepaws who will be helping me out. So if there are, like important questions, just Basepaws, maybe unmute yourself and say, hey, we got an important question. Well, without further ado, I am Dr. Ernie Ward, and it is my highest honor and privilege, and it's going to be a lot of fun to hang out with you guys tonight talking about cats. And we're going to talk about sort of what impacts their life expectancy, quality of life, risk for disease. I mean, just everything the most, and that is going to be their body condition. We're also going to talk about the role that genetics plays and a few other interesting things. So this is kind of squarely aimed at the more educated, interested cat parents, right? So, I mean, some of this stuff, there will be some medical terminology. There's going to be quite a few reviews and citations that we're going to present with you. But, so I'm kind of aiming this for a little bit higher order of cat parent. I mean, sometimes I do these things and we just kind of keep it real simple, like stop feeding your cat so much. But tonight we're going to go a little bit deeper. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of switch over. And if you guys, can, turn on the subtitles. I brought the one. I do not know that there's a way to turn on the subtitles. I think you'd have to do that on your end. Great question, Basepaws. If you can figure that one out, let them know. But I think there's some settings that you have to actually initiate on your side. Well, let's jump into some slides. So the title of tonight's presentation, I got to thank my friends at Basepaws. I've been working with them for a long time. Just a fantastic company, wonderful researchers, and just I got to tell you, the future. I mean, there's so many things I wish I could talk to you about that we're working on. That it's just exciting. But I want to thank them for really, taking to heart, how to help our cats live longer, healthier lives. And so the title is Chonky Cats and Longevity, right? I mean, that's right there. That's what the essence of all of this. Genes, diet. Is this a health hazard or is it hype? I mean, sometimes people are like, oh, it's good for them to be heavy, and maybe not, okay? And what you need to know to extend your cat's life expectancy. So again, if you're interested in following me on social media, I do a lot of stuff. Obviously, a lot of it's for veterinarians. That's primarily, who I'm lecturing to and writing and doing research for. But, obviously, we drop a lot of stuff out there as well. A couple of quick things that you may want to take note of, though, tonight for sure. Number one, we'll be referencing a lot of Project 25. side. Now, this is an initiative that I began back in 2015 with the sole purpose to extend the life expectancy of dogs and cats 25% by year 2025, and to ultimately achieve a 25-year average life expectancy for dogs and cats. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Also, petobeసిtyprevention.org. Please go over. Every October, we do surveys and prevalence studies with vets and pet parents like yourself. So go over and sign up so that when October rolls around, we will send you out a link to take a quick survey. But these surveys, and again, we are the only group out there that's not like sponsored or take money from pet food companies, pharma companies. We're it. That's it. Everybody else has got something else involved, some bias there. So we really need your help. I mean, this is a grassroots effort for hundreds and hundreds of vets across the country that are just passionate about obesity. So definitely check that out if you can, petobeసిtyprevention.org. And if you want to ever just listen in on what's happening in the veterinary world, I've been doing a podcast every Wednesday. In fact, tomorrow is a really exciting one. We've got a Ukrainian veterinarian on called the Veterinary Viewfinder. It's available everywhere. We're 5.5 years in. I have a wonderful registered veterinary technician who's also been doing some stuff with genetics over the years, Becky Mosser, RVT. So definitely check that out for sure. And of course, on the socials, you can find me anywhere under that. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about, my sort of belief and vision and aspiration to get cats and dogs to live longer, healthier, more meaningful lives. And just this month, I was really honored to write an op-ed in one of our largest veterinary journals, DVM 360. And as you can see, here's the title, 3 Steps plus 5 Years equal 25-year-old pets. And what I'm doing basically is laying out a roadmap for veterinarians and veterinary professionals to how we can get within 5 years to an average life expectancy of 25 years for small dogs and cats. And honestly, we're a lot closer than you might imagine. But again, if you're interested, you can definitely check out that. I'm sure maybe even Baseballs can send you links or whatever. But that was a really, this is one of those, I've written about longevity for, the past 20 years, but this one has sparked off a lot of conversations within the veterinary world. So again, that's what we're talking about tonight. Also, last summer, Basepaws did partner with Project 25. So if you have a cat right now that's 17 years or older, and we do need some kind of medical record to back that up, let us know, because if you haven't had your genome sequenced by Basepaws yet, you just might be able to get it done for free. So definitely reach out after this, during this, whatever. Tell them Dr. Ernie sent you, but we definitely want you to sign up and participate, because we're actually trying to unlock the secrets of your cat's DNA to help other cats moving forward. So tonight we're talking about the chonksters, the chonky cats, the round boys, right? I mean, all those cute things. And these are actually just some random photos from Instagram and Facebook that are out there. So a lot of us talk about chonky cats. And the first thing I got to say is, we've got to be careful with the terminology, because this is a disease state, as we're going to show you clearly over the next few minutes. And so I don't think that, we can sort of take this lightly, especially if we want our cats to live long, healthy lives that they find great enjoyment, right? Because as a veterinarian for now 30 plus years, I see so many of these cats that were 20 pounds, in their youth, so to speak. And then suddenly, now they're 15, 14, 13 years of age, and they've got diabetes, they've got crippling arthritis, they've got high blood pressure. I mean, you name it, they've got a roster, and we'll show you some of the data to support this, but they've got this entire roster of disorders that leaves them miserable. They are suffering. And so honestly, when people say, Ernie, why do you keep tackling all this stuff with obesity and longevity and senior pets and all this stuff? It's because I want to eliminate suffering, right? I want to help you as pet parents to help your pets avoid any kind of disease or suffering, is certainly what we can. Now, here's a picture, a real picture of a real cat with obesity. And a lot of times when I'm talking to pet parents, they are seeing a big cat. In fact, a lot of cat owners out there are like, well, he's a big, you should have seen his mama, his daddy. Everybody thinks they've got the Shaquille O'Neal of cats out there, right? And the reality is there are only a couple of Shaquille O'Neals on the planet. So, I think a lot of times people say, well, it's a big dog, it's a big cat, he had a big mama, he had a big daddy, and really it's obesity. Now, many veterinarians, they see a cat with obesity, right? So I think I've done a good job myself and a small cohort of vets who've been passionate about this for over 20 years. And I think we've now gotten the profession to have a more concrete definition of obesity and a better understanding of body condition score. Heck, we've now got at least alignment on one body condition score scale. There've been four actually worldwide over the past 20 years. So now we've got a consensus statement on one. So a lot of vets see obesity, but I don't see either. I don't see a big cat. I don't see a cat with obesity. What I see is chronic inflammation. And you're going to keep hearing this over and over tonight from me, because obesity actually, the reason that it is so harmful is because of the chronic systemic inflammation. And every time when you're watching the morning news shows and you hear a doctor on there talking about inflammation and anti-inflammation and trying to do anything with longevity, you're going to hear all these terms thrown around, because we know that to help us live a longer life, to help us reduce our risk of getting disease, we've got to control inflammation. And so, there are a lot of things we can do. There's a lot of things that we still are learning, but we can do that. So let's look at sort of the current definition of obesity. Obesity is a disease. And again, this is straight out of Koppelman's landmark paper back in 2000. And he was already declaring on the human side, it is declared officially a disease in which excess body fat accumulates to the point where health is adversely affected. So I want you to be clear, when we're talking about pets with obesity, we're already saying there's a disease state. Health is adversely affected. This isn't a cat that's just a couple extra pounds heavy, right? When we say obesity, which is really where we're going to be landing tonight, and typically if you've got a regular domestic short hair, medium hair, long haired cat, that puts us above 13, 14 pounds. Once they cross over there, it's very difficult based on the biometrics that we have and on the body morphology of that cat, the typical American cat. It's hard for us to make a case for them to be more than 13 or 14 pounds without entering into obesity, for sure, right? This is just a visceral adiposity or belly fat issue. And so that's when we look at morphology, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But so just be aware, when we start cracking 13, 14 pounds plus, for me, that's qualifying as obesity, and that's where the worst damages from inflammation is occurring, these cytokines, which we'll talk about too a little bit. Now, here's the standard that we've all adopted. So, and part of the organization that I started, the Association for Pet Obesity Prevention, about 4 or 5 years ago, we started getting the largest groups of veterinary organizations, all the colleges, the specialists, the different groups to say, look, we need to get a consensus on how to define obesity, what constitutes obesity, and is obesity a disease? And so currently we have 25 of the world's largest veterinary organizations. Obviously, these are primarily European and North American, South American as well. And everybody is now, we've got agreement. And this is the scale. It's a 1 to 9 scale. So if you hear your veterinarian saying 7 out of 9, 8 out of 9, well, now we're tipping over into the danger zone for sure. Now, when we start to look at the literature, why this is important, you're going to hear me say this several times from different research and papers. And again, these are just 3 of the main ones that we draw upon that have been really good meta studies. When we look at obesity in cats, this list is the list that we now accept. Diabetes mellitus, without a doubt, at the top. And honestly, when I go back 30 years, we didn't see the number of cats with diabetes. Why? Because we didn't have the number of cats with obesity. GI disease, hepatic lipidosis, fatty liver disease, high blood pressure, musculoskeletal disease. Arthritic pain is now again becoming this big thing that we just didn't see 30 years ago when I was a young veterinarian. Cancer or neoplasia, eye diseases, mouth diseases. Again, Basepaws has a wonderful oral microbiome test that you should definitely have your cat checked out, because again, getting a good grip of what bacteria are the normal flora for your cat is really important so that you can detect disease earlier and do something, intervene earlier. Skin diseases and upper and lower urinary tract conditions. Again, those are the big list that we always refer to. And so then when we look at lifespan, life expectancy, and these terms are kind of thrown around there, they're 2 completely separate things. Lifespan is like what your maximum optimal based on your organism could actually live, and life expectancy is what you actually see in the real world, but they do get thrown around both ways. So, but we look at, Tang's study for sure, and McCreevy's study, cats that had a 9 out of 9 obesity had a shorter average lifespan than cats in ideal weight. And again, these just studies go over and over when we look at population. So let's look at some of the data on the chonky cats. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this tonight because let's face it, there's too many. There's just simply too many. Now, my organization, the Association for Pet Obesity Prevention, which please go sign up, petobesityprevention.org. Just sign up to get notified when the survey drops, and hopefully you can then encourage your vet to help us as well if they're not. But we know that about 60% of US cats are classified as overweight or have obesity. Of course, dogs, it's about 56%. And so this means that there's about 58 million cats that are at risk of developing these diseases, right? And of course, when we actually dive down deeper, there's a couple of really important distinctions between excess weight, excess fat, and dogs versus cat. When it comes to cats, cats have more obesity. Again, that categorization of a disease state than dogs do. And you can see clearly here, when we look at just the overweight category, that's only about 26%. And of course, 34% have obesity. And again, this is as classified by their veterinarian. This is our last nationwide survey. It was done in 2018. We were due one in 2020, but we all know what happened then. So let's talk about some of the causes tonight, okay? So what are the causes of it? And I've got to, first of all, say it's not as simple as you're feeding too much and you're exercising too little. That game is played out. That is old, dated advice. Honestly, it's so much more complicated, and you've got to help me work with veterinarians because they've got to understand it's not just feed too much, exercising too little. If it were that simple, we would be making strides in human obesity, but we're not. We're actually going backwards in almost all surveys that we see. So when we look at some of the studies and we look at the science, the causes run the gamut, just like in humans. Number one, what we're going to talk about tonight, genetics and the epigenetics, right? So your cat's genes largely influence whether or not it's going to get obesity. And there's even some emerging data, especially on the humans, that how your body deals with that excess fat actually determines which diseases you'll get. Some fantastic new research that just came out this year. So genetics. We got to talk about this. And this is, again, why I'm so happy to partner with Basepaws and continue to push them. And you can help me push them as well, because there are several little parts of the gene in cats that I am very, very, very certain that we're going to find we can do something about. And again, it's not just that genes are destiny. It's that when you know that you've got a genetic risk factor, you can intervene. You know that, for example, if you are a human, and you know that you have a risk of breast cancer, well, there are things you can do to be more vigilant, right? So if you see, wow, my genes say I'm at risk for this, it doesn't mean you're destined to get breast cancer. But what you can do is start to be a lot more vigilant, do more mammography, do more blood testing and so forth, and try to stay ahead of it so that you could catch it at its earliest inception. Now apply that same strategy, that same ethos to obesity. So much easier to intervene, right? So this is what's so exciting about understanding which cats are at greater risk. And I'll tell you, it also has to do with the way they metabolize carbohydrates, storage of fats. I mean, there's a lot more to this. I think we can even tweak the diet, but Basepaws, we're working on it, all right? Also, the life stage of cats has a big influence on whether or not they develop obesity. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. And I'll give you a hint there. Spay and neuter has a lot to do with it. The diet, of course, hormonal and biological influences. So your cat's unique endocrinology really influence. So which hormones and how. Stress plays a big role here. Cortisol, inadequate sleep or restorative sleep. Again, probably back more to cortisol for sure. All of these things contribute to your cat getting obesity. Lifestyle, again, sometimes they don't have access to exercise or they're not stimulated. They don't have a really good environment. So we call that an obesogenic environment. Other diseases, some medications, particularly like seizure medications in particular. The microbiome, we did touch on the oral microbiome, but we know that the gut or intestinal microbiome also plays an important role in how we metabolize nutrients. And so there's an emerging body of data that says, hey man, listen, there may be certain flora in the gut that actually are obesogenic as well. And then of course, endocrine disruptors, which I will tell you, there has been fascinating research in the past couple of years on the role of pesticides and plastics. I think I took out a lot of that tonight because it's so overwhelming, but just be aware there's an emerging body of evidence. And, I remember when I wrote my first obesity book called Chow Hounds back in 2010, I talked about this. And at that time, the science was in its infancy, and boy, vets just got all upset with me. They're like, how can you talk about bisphenol and phthalates and pesticides, like atrazine, there's no evidence. I mean, there was evidence. It was emerging, and these stuff had been banned in Europe long before I wrote my book. So again, there's a lot more to this story, right? Why is North America, why is the Europe having, especially UK having these record obesity things? But I also want to point out that it's us too, right? I mean, there is a definitely some truth to feeding too much, but we're really getting more sophisticated at understanding what that means. Because why? Because the relationship you have with your cat actually determines how much you feed them, how you feed them, when you feed them, right? All those kinds of things. So we know that from research that cats influence you. Yes, you heard that right, folks. Anybody here that loves cats like we do, they already knew this, but researchers have concluded, that, hey, guess what? The cat is actually manipulating us to give them more, give them this, give them that, and all that kind of stuff. Some fascinating research out there on that. But getting into the genetics too, I mean, this goes back to 2011. And if you look at, certainly I think that, Herring was really one of the first people in certainly that I am aware of, who really started saying, let's take a look at cat genetics and whether or not there is some kind of linkage there with obesity, right? Because, and again, Herring was drawing on, mounds of research from lab animals and humans for sure. But that's really the first one when we looked at, cats and started looking at it. And the conclusion, this is the first study in which a genetic component could be shown to be responsible for the development of overweight in cats, right? So again, Herring was back in 2011, which is now 11 years ago, already saying this. Another 2014 paper, and this is actually a really solid paper as well, out of the UK. This was out of RVC, of the Royal Vet College. And again, they identified a polymorphism in the coding sequence of the MC4R region, one of those areas that I'm very interested in as well, that was associated with diabetes mellitus, is also similar in humans. So what they were finding was that the MC4R region, which we knew from human studies and lab animal studies, was related to diabetes mellitus, fat storage, and of course obesity. Cats have the same, so there's a lot of linkages there. So again, baseballs, we're working on it, right? Another study that just came out of Cambridge, right during the pandemic, right? So this was one of those papers, and a lot of good research got published during 2020 that just kind of didn't make the news or didn't make the vet world because, let's face it, we were overwhelmed dealing with a pandemic. But this study right here was a meta-analysis for sure. And they, again, on feline obesity and related disease, multiple studies suggest breed as a risk factor in feline obesity. Together, these data suggest obesity may be at least in part a heritable trait in cats. And so I will say, like certain breeds, like Persians, have you read some research that say certain breeds are more likely to have obesity or less likely. And with Persians and other breeds, I've seen conflicting studies, but what you start to see is that everybody says, wait a second, there is a heritability. There is somehow we can trace this back to the genetics. So that's really the through line right here. Now, epigenetics is sort of when you've got your genes, right? So let's say you or your cat has some genetic distinction that says you're more likely to store abdominal fat, you're more efficient, right? Or you're just more prone to this. Maybe it's even a hormonal cascade. It doesn't matter the actual etiology of that. But what we're showing is that, wow, cats and people and a lot of other animals, we can actually measure something called methylation. And so what they're able to do now, and this is something too that Basepaws is beginning to go into, you've probably heard about your biological age, right? So if you 23andMe and others, they'd have to do a more recent test for you, but you can actually look at your genes and say, wow, where are you biologically? And that's something too that I'm excited about with cats, because right now, this research that just came out last August, It's just showing that these biological clocks exist. So now we're going to lean on people like Basepaws to say, okay, we want to get our cats and we want to figure out where they are biological age-wise, right? Because that, again, helps us from an interventional standpoint. Because, let's say you've got a 13-year-old cat and suddenly you do this test and it shows, well, your cat has the health of a 20-year-old. Well, we need to change something fast, and we can. And this is where like dietary interventions, maybe some supplementation with some anti-inflammatories. I mean, already I can tell you DHA is going to be on my list for that right there. But I think, the beautiful thing about understanding these biological clocks and methylation is the fact that we can intervene as long as we catch it, early enough in light. Obviously, if you do it at 20 years and they say your cat's 30 years, that's not good either. Again, more of this for sure. When we talk about life stage, this is talking about obesity for sure. Weight management following neutering appears to be very important to reduce the overall prevalence of overweight obesity. No news to me for sure. I mean, this is something we've been talking about for a long time. Interestingly, a French company called Veerback did just launch in the US the very first diet that addresses this specific need post-neutering or spaying. So again, not an endorsement or anything like that, but just saying that people are responding to the research and they're giving us products that we can actually use with our pets for sure. Hormonal, again, when we look at the physiology, again, the complicated nature of the pathogenesis of obesity. I mean, nobody in research, nobody in medicine is going to simplify it to just feed them less, exercise more, because it's just not that straightforward. I mean, that's an important thing to do for sure, but there's a lot more to it. And so when we look here, when we look at canine and feline obesity, we're looking at endocrinology for sure. Now, getting back to that influence of how your cat is manipulating you, I break it down into three main areas that I'm looking for, okay? First of all, we call this the food refusal strategy. You and I know it as finicky eating, but when you put down like a healthier food, a lower calorie diet, right? Maybe even a therapeutic weight loss diet, and they get finicky, what do? You don't have to answer because I can hear you through the internet. You feed them the old stuff. You feed them what they want to eat. You feed them something that they say, now that's more like it, right? So again, cats do influence our behaviors. And I like to start off by talking about finicky eaters because I think we can all relate to it, but you start to now see how even more complex the emotional interaction is, right? Because we start to look at it. Now, the begging, of course, duh, we've all been awakened by our cats at 2 or 3 in the morning saying, hey, did you forget something out there? Because you did, and I'm here to wake you up and let you know, let's go. So for us, when we look at that, those motivations for sure, and sometimes these are not just hunger, but these are behaviors, right? I mean, cats do, they like to feed and eat and hunt, during the dawn and the dusk hours, right? So they like to be in low light conditions. So there's also behavioral cues there. There can be pathological. There can be actually, cats that develop really negative feeding behaviors. And of course, this just gets reinforced whenever we get up at 2 and give them for more food as well. The expectation, again, there's not only time, the setting, but also, where are they being fed? And this becomes spatial orientation and spatial composition of feeding really becomes important with multi-cat households. And, you've heard me probably over the years talk about, these zones of ownership. And there's been plenty of studies, some brilliant researchers out of Hungary, back 15 years ago, started looking at dogs and these exclusionary zones for dogs. And basically for dogs, they need about 18 inches. Anything that's about 18 inches, that's mine, right? So what we've seen anecdotally, and certainly, in doing this 30 years, that cats have similar zones of ownership as well. This is why I'm a fan of each cat having their own food bowl and separating them by a couple of feet for sure. And I know a lot of people are going, I just have the one communal bowl. They all do fine. If you have the communal bowl, you're more likely to develop what I call the food bowl bully, right? And this is where one cat will intimidate others. And so in these households that use the communal bowls, the all-day buffets, as I call them, it's not uncommon for me to see one cat with obesity and 2 or 3 or more cats that are kind of normal weight. That's not a healthy feeding orientation for sure. Again, high arousal, social interactions. This means that, we make a big deal about it. So the owner is like, are you ready to eat? You ready to eat? Who's hungry? Right? So we actually excite the animal around feeding times. And so they start to cue on that and they go, oh, well, they want me to dance for them. Oh, the cat wants me to twirl around. They want me to twirl around their legs or whatever, right? So we actually entice them and train them to do certain behaviors, which again spirals upward in terms of feeding demands, okay? And one of the things too, we call it the postprandial satiety cascade. But for us, that means that after you feed your dog or your cat, how does the owner feel? And this is really important for dogs. And if you have dog owners out there, you know what I'm talking about. If your dog wolfs down its food in 30 seconds, you conclude, because based on your own human experience of eating, that you must be starving. So your dog, there's no way, it could be full after gobbling it down in 30 seconds. So you refill the bowl. And we actually see these same behaviors expressed in cats where they literally, as soon as the fresh food comes out of the can or the bag or whatever, suddenly the cats just go straight, dive into the food bowl. Again, you now are being trained to say, oh, they must be hungry, and you top it off more afterwards, right? So again, it's how do you view them as satiated or not after that? Okay, so who cares, right? I mean, it's just junk. That's what a lot of people say. And I still have to even convince veterinarians that obesity is a disease, right? That 18-pound cat is just, a metabolic disaster, right? And it's just a matter of time until a crisis occurs. And so it does matter, right? And we're going to review some of that stuff. I mean, we showed you earlier some of the research. This is from a paper I co-authored, the 2014 American Animal Hospital Association weight management paper. And so, this was a phenomenal group, really had never been done before. And I was super happy to be one of the authors on this paper. But, when we were looking at all the research back then, these are the things. They don't live as long. They have skin disorders. I mean, we just talked about this: orthopedic disease, cancer, metabolic endocrine diseases, diabetes, respiratory, kidney, chronic inflammation, right? All of that is related to excess fat, adiposity. So if we look at some of the other papers out there for sure, and this is one from 2018, and again, this is a meta-analysis of the literature. So after we did our paper, which we did a mini review of the current existing evidence at that time, then in 2018, another group came through and said, okay, let's go back and let's review and see, has anything changed over the past 4 years? And of course, it hadn't. Lower urinary tract disease, diabetes mellitus, respiratory, skin disorders, locomotor, and trauma, all of those related specifically to cats. Right. So this is the evidence. This is, I'm not trying to convince you, but this is it. There was another part of the study that were sort of some observational studies done as well. And again, self-reporting is very limited in its utility in science, but this is I just want to repeat it. But cats that were reported to be fed predominantly dry food were reported by their owners to be a greedy eater, or reported by their owner to be less active. Those were also factors that, contributed to those cats with obesity. And again, I kind of always hesitate to give you self-reporting data, but this was a very elegantly designed study, except for this little coda, if you will. Here's another study that talked about Birmans and Persians, which one do they have obesity or not? And honestly, we see it go back and forth. So I'm not until we get better genetic analysis, I'm not willing to declare certain cat breeds yet. There are certain dog breeds, and we've gotten some really interesting data, especially from Labrador retrievers and a couple other breeds on a particular gene that regulates food drive, that wolfing down the food and that desire for rewards. And again, if you think about how we've co-evolved with dogs, we've actually raise them to be fed a treat, a food or whatever, and then do an appropriate behavior, whether it was guarding us, in the camps or whatever, or if it's, just go fetch your ball. We use food as that reward. And so the higher the food drive is for the dog, the more likely they are to have social adaptation. So you can see how again, elegantly intertwined all of that is. Fascinating stuff. So how much should you feed? And we do want to get to some questions here. So, and I love some of the comments that are coming in. I just can't kind of keep up with them all and do the presentation. But how much should you feed? Well, first of all, you need to work closely with your veterinarian. Now, if you go to petobesityprevention.org, you're going to see tons of charts and formulas, and you calculate put your cat's weight and look at a chart, and that's how much you should feed for whatever. But when we're looking at these calculations, I mean, they can be very sophisticated, right, with an exponential factor here of 0.75, or you can also use a pretty simple factor called 30 times ideal weight in kilograms plus 70, right? That gives you what we call the resting energy requirements. Now, for veterinarians, if you're a veterinary professional watching tonight, obviously we want to stick with the exponential formula. I think that does give us the more accurate. It is interesting, if you go back and read in 2010, I talked about, how many, I mean, in 2010, there really was not consensus around this formula. And I kind of was challenging the profession in chow hounds. I was saying, I found about 70 different references with different conclusions on basic metabolic rates and energy requirements and all that kind of stuff. And I conclude, this is what I landed on, because when I started really diving into the best research, this is the formula. But I'm going to tell you right now, it is still just an approximation. And I'm also a certified personal trainer, a USA Triathlon Ironman coach, and all this stuff. So I'll deal with people who sometimes their primary objective, maybe they need to lose weight for an athletic event, or they're trying to get a PR or whatever. And you run these figures, you do these approximations, and people are like, I'm not losing any weight. Well, a lot of times it's just not appropriate for your particular metabolism. So again, I always try to caution vets that these are just starting points, right? For you, when we calculate up your cat's number of calories to feed, what we're actually going to need to feed to is the body condition. Because if I do the calculations, it says I should feed 210 calories to your cat per day, and we do that for 90 days, 3 months, and your cat didn't lose any weight, we're going to have to adjust that, right? That doesn't mean that the calculation is wrong. It just means that for your cat's physiology, it probably wasn't correct or as accurate as we need it to be, right? So again, you have to kind of marry all that in there. And I think that a lot of times as veterinarians and as cat parents, lovers of all things cats, we kind of want, there's the answer. Give me the number. I want to see the results. And then people get frustrated, and it's just, this is biology. I mean, we're all individualized. And that's why I keep hammering home the causes are multifactorial, right? That also means that the solutions are going to be multifactorial. We can't just expect one formula to apply. Heck, I can't even apply the same nutrient formulations. Right now, I typically for cats tend to go with a high protein, high fiber therapeutic diet. Like that's right, low calorie, obviously. That's where I start. Right. And that's just leaning into the cat's physiology. So that's kind of an easy place. But I've also had cats that did not respond to that nutrient formulation. And we had to flip the equation and go with high fiber, high carbohydrate, and so you just wind up, you never know. But this is why working with your veterinarian, going back and forth and understanding. And I think, again, having been a personal trainer now for a long time, I guess 15 or so years or more, you see people and they want the 8-week beach body, and that doesn't always happen, and they get frustrated. And so at the end of 6 weeks, they're like, I'm not going to be able to look good in my bathing suit, right? And so they just stop. And that's also what we can't do with our cats, right? I mean, they deserve our attention, and then, we've got to help them. Now, I then have adapted, we kind of started messing around with this 25 years ago because we got frustrated, right? We would see these cats hit these plateaus where they wouldn't lose weight anymore. They'd start to have persistent begging and pestering behaviors. So we started doing this thing called the step weight loss. And I've articulated this and written numerous articles, and there's stuff on the website and all that stuff. But basically, you're just going to gradually, systemically, methodically adjust downward the number of calories as body fat comes off. And so I think that, for vets that just try to start here and we want to end here, and they do this, just straight line calculations, they wind up, I think you lose people really early because the cat is starving, and I don't use that term lightly, because like like right now, I'm coming into a particular phase where I'm at the base phase of my training for the season coming up right now. So I'm also in that series where I am, increasing my output. So I'm doing much more longer activities, physical activities. So my training is going longer, and I'm also adjusting downward my calories, right? And even if I'm right now only creating a 200 calorie, which is what I'm kind of targeting right now, about 200 to 300 calorie deficit per day, I'm also realizing, well, that's going to take me quite some time to lose, the 3 or 4 pounds I need to get down. And so again, remember 3,500 calories per pound. And so when I'm looking at this stuff, what if I just said, you know what, I'm going to be down 1,000 calories. Oh, and like this morning, how long did I go out? I did my first workout at dawn was about 50 minutes. And then I did just before this, I got 1 hour and 25 minutes, right? There's just no way. What if I crash the calories? Your cat feels the same way, right? So you do want to gradually adjust this. The bad news is that requires a longer perception, right? Now, the reason that this is important to note, and I'm just going to give you a couple of quick things, is something that we've been talking about for a long time in physiology and nutrition called metabolic adaptation. And that is that your body's, energy requirements reset based on different environmental factors. So meaning that if you go into starvation mode, your body becomes much better at preserving fat stores. And so this is why that just straight line, let's just crash diet, it'll give you results, but not safely, and you can't sustain that, right? So it's really important. And even when you look at some of the studies in dogs and cats, for sure, you look at metabolic adaptation associated with less weight and fat mass loss in response to low energy diets, because your body actually then catabolizes muscle. So again, I don't want to get into that for sure, but when we look at metabolic adaptation, this is why kind of stepping that down makes a lot of sense. Now, we didn't have that 25 years ago. I mean, the people that I was working with and the vets I was talking to, I was like, just try this because it seems to be working for us. And honestly, the trigger for me was the pestering, the begging behaviors, the cats getting you up at 2 and 3 in the morning. So I was like, we've got to be a little more gradual with the adjustment. Again, when we look at the studies in dogs and cats, this metabolic adaptation is now becoming much more prevalent in the scientific literature. Here's a couple of studies, one from my good friend Alex German over in the UK for sure. And these are both, from 2011 and 2018. Again, just metabolic adaptation, you got to do it. So what are the goals for you tonight? First and foremost, I want to tell you that for kitty cats, it's about 0.5 pound a month. And you can see already, this is why when I see that 22-pound cat come in, okay, and I go, oh my gosh, we need to lose 10 pounds. Well, that's 20 months. I mean, that is nearly 2 years. And you can imagine just how overwhelming and intimidating this is for that cat parent. But we've got to get the weight off. Now, it doesn't mean that if we don't hit 12 pounds that we've lost, because every pound lost is a risk factor diminishment, okay? So I really want us to take the wins. So we lost 3 pounds, 4 pounds, 5 pounds. The idea is to continue on this journey, but it just takes a long time. And I think that, when people look at cats, and people are like, why is this? This doesn't make any sense. Well, cats use completely different energy systems. Their physiology really thrives on using a form of sugar for its primary energy source, whereas dogs and humans use fat. This is why when I joke and I say cats don't jog, it's because they don't have the energy sources to sustain jogging, whereas we do. So we are using fatty acids to propel me this morning during the first workout and this afternoon during my second. I'm using fat. In fact, I was solidly in zone 2. I did a couple of sprints, but you get where I'm going. I'm using fat. Cats just know sprint mode, right? They evolved to go all out for 90 seconds, and then they've got to replace those glycogen stores, and that's going to take maybe 4 hours or more just to get back up to where their muscles actually have the energy to propel them to chase down that animal or whatever. So this is, it's very interesting physiology, and this is one of the things that I love about it. So again, for most of my cat patients, we're really looking, at a year, 9 to 12 months. So people, you've got to be patient with your vet for sure. And just some examples. I don't want to bore you with the details, but if this is a 16-pound cat, our ideal weight was 10 pounds for this based on the morphology or the body size. So we're going to shoot for about 0.5 pound a month. That's 9 to 12 months to hit that target. And so again, what we start to do is we calculate those calories at the first 3 months, or I always do this in 90-day increments because we're going to adjust nutrient formulations, tactics, and so forth based on the responses. But we're going to do it at like 14, 12, and 10. And that's that step, as you can see. And so here's the number of calories, right? We repeat. There's a couple of warnings here. Obviously you can't just cut down their calories dramatically. You can't go below 70% of RER, even on a therapeutic diet. And I guess I want to just briefly point out, why do vets always go to a therapeutic diet? Well, it's a really simple thing about managing micro and macronutrients. Because if you take just a regular, complete and balanced cat food, okay, and you say, well, I'm going to cut the calories back. Well, you can do that maybe 10, 15% for most cats. We don't know, right? Because we don't know the physiology of your cat. You can get away with cutting it back just a little. Now, the bad news is that's probably not going to get you to these numbers to get you to desired weight loss. So if we start cutting below 80% RER, 80%, and below, to 70%, then we've got to make up for it. So we have to have a diet that has lower calories, but then maintains all the vitamins and minerals, the essential fatty acids and so forth, right? So that is a very difficult balance. And so, like I'll work with some cat owners and I want to do a homemade diet. And man, it is really difficult to get that balance right. In fact, I usually just throw my hands up and go, guys, let's get the weight off first. Just work with me. This is like giving a prescription drug, okay? So let's just work for the next 6 months. Let's just go with this particular quote unquote diet drug and let's see where we get. We may get to a point in the future where we can go back to feeding a home prepared meal or whatever your favorite thing is. But right now, during this initial phase, we've got to treat this like the disease that it is. And diseases typically need medical interventions. So let me intervene right now. So that's really what we do. But I never, ever go below 70%. There are some situations where we might supplement above that. But typically, if 80% isn't working, 70% of RER isn't working, it's usually a formulation challenge then. And then physical activity, and there's other factors as well. I'm looking for comorbidities for sure. Also, you've got to check in. The most frustrating thing for me, and I'm going to finish up here in another 5-10 minutes because I want to take some of your questions. As long as Baseballs can help us out there, maybe start getting some of the good ones and you can read them out to me. But one of the things that frustrates me the most is the cat that I see on second opinion or referral, and it's been on the same diet for 1 year and no weight loss. They're going, I spent all this money, all this time, nothing's changed. People, do not make this mistake. This is the single most avoidable mistake in all of veterinary medicine, right? Track it, change it. Track it, change it. It is that simple. And for me, it's always about 90 days. It's always 90 days. Now people are like, well, there are some physiological metrics that actually start to kick in, that metabolic adaptation stuff. So there's a little bit of science there, but also this gives us enough time with cats because we talked about how slowly they can lose weight because of their physiology and different energy systems that are engaging. They're not drawn on that big fat pad, right? For energy, that takes a long time to get them to metabolize it away. So I'm going to say, let's give them 3 months. And then check and change, track and change. And that is the single most important thing you can do. Do not let your vet put you on a therapeutic diet and say, we'll see you in 6 months. We'll see you in a year. Call me if there's a problem. You need to say, I will be back in this office in 90 days for a recheck. I want to make sure, A, that the diet is working. Remember, this is a medical intervention for a disease. B, I want to make sure that the disease isn't getting worse or causing other problems. Remember that list of all those things that can happen? Well, they're going to happen if we don't get this under control. So you need to insist to see your veterinarian. And if your vet says, oh, don't worry, he's just a little chonky, then you need to find another vet because they're not addressing it as a disease. And then you're going to call me and go, okay, my cat's blood pressure was 300 and now his retina is popping out. He's blind in one eye, or he's blown out his kidneys, right? Or he can't walk anymore. He can't get in the litter box. I mean, it's the sequelae, and I used to say something, and I still say it, and I get in trouble every time I say it, so I'll go ahead and say it again. And that is, obesity isn't a problem until it's a catastrophe. And that's really what we're talking about. So your cat is carrying that 18 pounds, fine. You're 8, you're 10, you're 12, and then at 12 and a half, suddenly the blood sugar goes up. Suddenly the arm goes out. Suddenly the blood pressure, the vision, whatever, right? I mean, that's how it actually happens. And sadly, by the time all of those things happen, those are almost all irreversible. I mean, now I've got medical management for the rest of their life. And that's the heartbreaking part to me. All right, so in the last couple of minutes here, What should you do? Just some tips. Number one, you should separate and give individualized feedings for multi-cat households. Hey, we're all living the same, people are like, oh, Dr. Ward, that's impossible. Well, how is it impossible if it's happening at my house, right? I mean, this is not that hard. I like to use the little soy sauce bowls, the little tiny bowls, that like soy sauce comes in. That's just what I call them. I'm sure there's a proper name for them out there, little sauce bowls, but that's what we use. And again, you're feeding typically small amounts. And I usually am doing this 3 times a day. I typically do morning when everybody's, dogs, cats, kids, everybody's getting fed in the morning, usually the dinner time feeding. And then my pets get what I've always called the midnight snack. So right before we go to bed, dogs and cats are fed a very small last portion of their daily. Remember, it's divided up into 3 little things. So the last part, and that helps give them some satiety overnight. And again, we're feeding higher protein formulations in general. And so for us, that extra protein also gives satiety, a feeling of fullness. And so that hopefully gets them to 5 a.m., which is when everybody starts waking back up. And it typically does. But you need to work on this because cats can also be trained to have timed meals. I think that people are sort of have this misperception that they need food all the time. They need a big bowl of food out in case they get hungry. You got manipulated, you got played, right? Unless there's some kind of physiological medical condition that says your cat needs to have access to food all the time. And there are a few, right? I mean, so even diabetes would be one of those. But regardless, what you need to do is set patterns of behavior. You need to actually train your cat, say, hey, it's dinner time. And this doesn't, people are like, oh, that's going to make them eat too quickly. It's just not how it goes down with any of my clients or my own pets, for sure. Of course, I love hunter feeders. I love food puzzles. I mean, there's so many cool things. I love anything that engages a cat to the inner predator, as I call it, right? So it says, hey, I want to work for my food. I think that's important. Automated feeders, I like them / I'm still waiting for that perfect one. They're getting very, very close. So we'll pause that for there. Find the food, feeding games, high-low feedings. I really like this for young adult cats. So one meal is fed like in an elevated position where they have to hop up on something. So a countertop, if you're into that. I know there's some people that are not. I am. So sometimes they're fed high, the other times they're fed low. And again, I'm just trying to initiate getting moving, right? Moving around for sure. Again, if you can, in feather dance, or, I know people are sometimes against like laser pointers, but there's all kind of automated toys, but I want something to engage their cat. I don't care if it's a paper bag. I just want your cat to getting just something to do really vigorously for a couple of times a day. Interactive toys, obstacle courses, get creative. Quickly, canned versus dry. When it comes to weight loss, okay, and I will say my preference is wet foods in general, but when it comes to weight loss, canned is king. And I'm going to tell you why, and it's super simple, and you might not have thought of it in this way before. It's because we can more accurately assess the number of calories. There's a pilot study we did back in 2006. We took the top 10 dry cat foods on the market at that time. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to explore, okay, how much would you have to feed extra a day to gain a pound a year, right? I mean, and that's actually not a tremendous amount of weight to gain, but so if you fed your cat a little bit extra, how much would that be to equal a pound? It turns out that of the most popular dry foods, and these calculations, we've kind of repeated them over the years, they're the same, 10 extra kibbles a day. Whoops, 2 hands. 10 extra kibbles a day. Now think about that little kernel of hard meow mix or whatever. If you feed an extra 10 of those a day, you're going to add up to a pound a year. Now, a can, if it says 180 calories, chances are that's a lot more accurate. And we've done all these studies. Alex and I used to do, when we would do these lectures together, we would like put on the tables where the vets and vet techs were out there, and we would like have a contest to see who could get as close to measuring up 1 cup as possible. And we found wide variations, typically about 25% variations from table to table. And nobody was ever spot on. A couple of times they were, but it's just a crapshoot. So can versus dry, where I sit on that. The last thing I want to talk about is, what's the future sort of looking at? And again, genetics, so base pause, and microbiome. Again, this is something we're going at. We're looking at cyclical feeding patterns, intermittent feeding. Really, I think it's probably more about the cat parent than the cat right now. Although there are some intriguing physiological trends in cats. But let's, again, maybe that's still being, we don't have an answer for you there. Environmental pollutants, we looked at this. I'm very, very concerned about the amount of pesticides cats are exposed to, the plastics that they're exposed to. And again, these are endocrine disruptors. And again, the role of fiber in cats, we keep every 10 or 15 years, we kind of cycle on and off of fiber and specific types of fiber. I mean, again, beta glucans, those are really intriguing. And honestly, I think there's definitely a big advantage to that. So anyway, that's it. Baseballs, folks, if we could, maybe you can get in my ear and tell me if there's some interesting questions. We got about 10 minutes or so. I'd be happy to take some questions. Definitely check me out on the socials. So, anyway, I hopefully Baseballs can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, and we've gotten a bunch of questions in the chat. Here's a great one. You mentioned cats not touching the healthier options, so the human feeds them the old food. They say they're guilty of this. How can I get them to eat the better food without wasting so much of it? They really seem to like this and won't give in.
Right. And you do have to be careful. I mean, I'm being a little silly about this because you can't starve your cat, and especially if it has obesity, because that's where hepatic lipidosis or fatty liver syndrome failure kicks in very quickly. So your cat can't go 48 hours without eating. So nobody's saying that. But I will say, if you get in that finicky situation where you're trying to transition, this is where the old 25% a day or every couple of days starts to really impact your feeding strategy. So let's say you put down the food and they're like, not for me, folks. What you want to do is then mix in 75% of the old food with 25%. Do that for 2 or 3 days. And what you're just going to gradually do that over a 1 to 2 week period, the same way you would transition any other diet. That's really the best advice I have. There are a lot of people that, will go to extraordinary lengths. But here's what I say also. I'm going to do this for like a week or so. If the cat is still rejecting the food, try another food. I mean, like if your veterinarian only gives you one therapeutic diet choice, demand more, because we have so many great therapeutic diets. You just have, typically what I find is that most of the time our first guess works, right? But for some of these kitty cats, I may be on diet option number 3, but guess what? We've got more than that to choose from. So again, get creative, try to transition in. If it doesn't work after a week, maybe 2 weeks, tell your vet, say, hey, take this bag back, give me another one, or cans or whatever.
Gotcha. Yes, great to know. We don't want to starve our cats, that's for sure. We've gotten a couple of questions about supplements you might recommend, some questions about CBD for different things like osteoarthritis. Is there anything that you would recommend to incorporate into your cat's
for weight
diet?
loss? Yeah. And again, we're gonna park the osteoarthritis as a whole different topic, and I'd love to come back and talk to you more about some of the, and honestly, there's great researchers out there. I've got a couple of good friends and colleagues that are doing a lot of interesting stuff with CBDs. And yes, I mean, obviously it's very promising. We just don't know yet. There's a lot to be discovered. But when it comes back to weight loss, really, there are 2 or 3 supplements that I always push. Number one is DHA. That's one of the fatty acids. DHA is the one that's most important and involved with your nervous tissue and brain function. So I'm always going to supplement that for cats, because there are some studies to show it can accelerate fat loss. And so this is a complex mechanism, but more importantly, I want to substitute it anyway to reduce inflammation. This is about inflammation, as we've pointed out multiple times. Other supplements, L-carnitine, I still supplement it in my weight loss patients, more dogs than cats. And creatinine, obviously those are good at preserving muscle mass. So really, I kind of look at the patient and start to determine which ones. Anybody out there with a cat right now, you can supplement DHA. Those are fish oils, although I typically use the algal sources for pure DHA. That's just a personal preference, and based on the literature, I'm really targeting the DHA aspect, although EPA is going to be converted to DHA down the line. But for me, those are really the 3 things: L-carnitine and then creatinine in those instances, especially when I'm concerned about preserving lean muscle.
Great. And earlier in the webinar, we had a couple questions about your survey and about where to find your resources. Of course, we know Dr. Ernie Ward, but please tell us a little bit about your survey and how everyone can participate.
Yep, petobesityprevention.org, and it may be hard to read on this slide for sure, but petobesityprevention.org, and you can, that's everything. It's free for everybody. Again, we're not affiliated with any sponsors or foods or whatever, so this is just the real deal. We're really proud of that.
Great. And we will definitely link this in our post-webinar emails, so don't you worry, you'll get access to that. You know, Dr. Ward, I think we've talked about treats before, me and you, but we have some people wondering what you think of them. And if you had to feed your cat a treat, are there any brands that might be better than others?
Well, first of all, I can't name any brands simply because that gets me in trouble. When it comes to treats, I'm not anti-treats. I'm anti-junk food, right? And so there's a huge distinction. And so for cats, I am liking some of the very simple, limited ingredient sort of entrees and things that are popping up out there. I think that a lot of people are getting very creative in the space. Having said that, I still, the best treat for me is to give a little bit of the canned food as the treat. So again, when you look at the feeding behaviors, like what is surrounding this, right? So what's happening with the owner, the cat owner, and the cat, and we have this, the owner feels compelled to reward the cat for whatever reason, right or wrong. We're not even gonna make a judgment. It doesn't matter. And so when you feel like that, number one, you've got to account for it in their daily calories, right? And that's when I kind of lean back and say, well, just keep a can in the refrigerator open, pop it in on a plate or a little soy sauce bowl, and hit it in the microwave for 15 seconds and then give that to your cat so that you know exactly how many calories, like, you feed out of that can, you're going to feed them 2 cans a day. So, after the morning feeding, you crack open the next one and give them as a treat. I still think that's the best strategy for weight loss for sure. But again, people are getting creative out there. Where people are really, really making some mistakes, in my experience clinically, is they are feeding all these toppers and entrees and all this other nonsense on top of, again, they're feeding the cat, 300 calories a day when it literally needs like 210 to 230. And so now we just are in gross excess calories.
Great. And I really like this one because it's simple. Carrie asked what your CVFT certification means.
Certified Veterinary Food Therapist. So that is more of a holistic approach. And so I got mine through the Chi Institute, and I've really tried to get a lot of in fact, one of my good friends who's the surgeon neurologist who was up at Cornell for all those years, Dr. Curtis Dewey, just got his CVFT. So congratulations, Dr. Dewey. But so it's just a way to look at food. And, again, you get into sort of some of the Eastern beliefs on it, and of course the Western, but it's to use food as a therapy.
Great.
Good question.
And I think we have time for maybe just one more, but seems like the common theme is people aren't sure how to maybe talk to their vet about proper diet, or they don't really know if their cat is getting what they need. So how would you approach that conversation with your own vet? How do you talk about their diet and how they're
Great question, because there's so many biases built in, and many times pet owners fear that they'll be judged by the vet. Many times they don't like the recommendations, like specific brands from the vet. So both parties have got to be open-minded. There's a letter in my first book, Chow Hounds, on obesity, where I basically have a letter to the pet owner and to the vet saying, look, we've got to come together. We've got to be open-minded and have this, we've got to really exchange ideas and come to consensus. So for me, it's great that you're asking this question. You should feel very comfortable, calling, emailing, texting, walking in, talking to your vet about nutrition. I will say this, and I say this to vet audiences all over the world. If your veterinarian is not interested in talking about nutrition with you, you need to find another veterinarian. The simple fact is, the single most important thing to impact your cat's life, risk assessment, longevity, all that stuff, is what we feed it and how we feed it. So if the vet is not interested in having that conversation about how to keep your cat healthy, live a long life, avoid disease, then you got to find, look, and vets hate it when I say that, but this is just the truth. And vets can't have it both ways. They can't say we are educated in this and then never have these conversations, right? Because we are educated in this. And most vets have done advanced training, getting additional certifications and credentialing, like myself and others, where we are passionate about this. So find that vet that is passionate. And I'll tell you, there are some generational shifts with this, right? I hate to do this, but like I think the vets ahead of me, the boomer vets, were probably not as interested because, man, they were just learning medicine, right? I mean, that was the whole era of modern veterinary medicine. And I think really when you got to the Gen X, when we really, became in our own, especially in our 30s, nutrition was popping off. And so people like me just lapped it up, no pun intended. And so, I think now you're seeing this shift down towards the younger vets, because when I now look in the audiences to who's in the room with me now, they're really young vets. And so I'm encouraged by that. So again, you got to find a vet who's passionate and is willing, because it's just that important, right? It's just that important. And literally every time I write a textbook chapter or paper or whatever, that is the one thing I will say to you. I'm always telling vets, this is the most important conversation you're going to have, right? Because it's going to impact the most pets. I mean, because we can talk about heartworm and spay neuter, we can talk about all these cancer risks and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, diet, what we feed, we do it every day, multiple times a day. That is the conversation we need to be very comfortable with, and we need to be willing to have it more openly.
Absolutely. And, it can be hard, but it's important to advocate for your pet. You're going to these regular wellness exams for their health. You want to make sure your questions are answered. And I agree, if your vet isn't, working with you, it's okay to look elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. And even with genetics, I've been talking about genetics for the past decade, and it's one of those atom bombs, right? It splits the room. And so, what we're realizing is that we're now coming into an era when we've got a lot of scientific evidence to back up, this isn't just, 12 years ago, me writing a book, and saying, hey, there's some early research. We're now looking at decades of solid research in genetics and longevity and nutrition and obesity. Honestly, it's just a different conversation today than it was 25 years ago.
Absolutely. And we do have a lot of questions, about your own personal cat, your situation. I think all these are great questions for your vets. Definitely save these, write these down, and bring them to your next vet visit, along with some of the things that you learned here today. So your vet can look at, your cat's history and try to guide you in the right direction. And we'll send out all of these resources we talked about today after the webinar. But this was a wonderful, wonderful webinar with you, Dr. Ward. We've got a lot of people saying thank you so much for hosting this. Any parting words for us before we let you go for the night?
No, I love what you said. You've got to be an advocate for your cat. I mean, that is the highest responsibility we have as cat parents. And I think it's important for you to feel comfortable and confident. And maybe I've armed you with a few little bits of advice and pieces of information that you can take in there and shield yourself, because these questions, these conversations are that important to me. And honestly, I'm just so encouraged by people like you showing up who want to get educated, who want to help cats. I mean, you have no idea how heartwarming it is, because having been in the vet profession now for over 30 years, it wasn't like this 30 years ago. So I can't thank you enough for your interest and participation, but most importantly, for making the lives of your cats better. So thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for being here. And thank you, Dr. Ward. This has been amazing. And we will wrap this one up until next time.